Okay, hi guys. I'm back with our final episode of Inherently, the Empathy series. Today we're going to talk about how artificial intelligence, which is sort of on the rise, well, I guess not on the rise because it's been developed, but becoming more so a part of our lives, which may or may not be scary, I'm not really sure, has impacted empathy. In researching this particular topic and how artificial intelligence impacts empathy, it was more so less on the side of how it impacts empathy that I found the literature on, but more how they're trying to develop empathy within artificial intelligence entities, which I found to be really interesting because I was like, why are they trying to create emotions in like computer entities? Like, why would you want to do that? And I think that's really, I don't know how to feel about it because like, I guess maybe they should have empathy because like, if robots do take over the world, like maybe they should feel a little bad about it. Like, I don't know. But this relates to a TikTok that I saw the other day where this guy was like, oh, I asked my Alexa to like turn down the music or something. I don't even know. And he said that it like whispered to him after like saying like, I can't do that. Would you like me to do something else? And it's like really weird to think about a robot whispering to you. And then other people were commenting like, the day my Alexa laughed randomly at 3 a.m., I threw it in the trash. I was like, imagine how creepy that would be. Now imagine your laptop crying with you. Like imagine your Alexa crying because you threw away your other Alexa. That's scary to me, but I don't know. Again, maybe they should have empathy because like if they are going to take over the world, like maybe they'll be like, sorry first, Anyway, so let's get into the neuroscience behind it. So also I took a computer science like coding class and that was so hard. So shout out to the people that are in computer science and do the little coding for all these things. It's so complicated. Please code for something helpful in the future. Maybe not empathy, maybe something else. Many of these forms of artificial intelligence draw on formation of artificial neural networks and cognitive science models. Empathy is an important social mechanism that utilizes a number of neural networks and has become a target for AI development in order to make AI programs and machines more personable and compassionate. However, it has been proven to be a difficult social behavior to mimic in artificial intelligence. This is because of all the components that I sort of outlined in the beginning. It's like not just one component, but it's very multi-layered and draws on a large number of areas. A successful example of empathic development was displayed in the development of the popular chatbot ChatGPT. I think we're all familiar with ChatGPT. Shout out ChatGPT is a natural language processing model developed by OpenAI. And it was trained to identify and respond to contextual words and string together an intellectually appropriate answer to these questions. Research was conducted on the perceived empathy of responses of ChatGPT in comparison with physicians to questions from participants. It was found that participants preferred the chatbot's responses and viewed them as more empathetic in a 3-to-1 ratio, with physician responses being rated 41% less empathetic. However, there were a lot of like confounding variables. They didn't limit the length of response, which length may be conflated with more empathy, as physician responses were shorter, or maybe they are typically shorter because again, physicians are usually on a time constraint. They have a lot of patients to see, so their responses are a little bit more cut and to the point, I guess. Additionally, it wasn't rated on accuracy, so ChatGPT's responses could have been wrong, but they were more empathetic based on the study. With more complex artificial intelligence agents, creating a computational model has proved to be more complicated. It has to reflect the multidimensionality of empathy, and existing models have only been able to successfully present some of the components of empathic capacity. It has been proposed that the model of empathy for interactive artificial intelligence agents should include 3 levels of structure that is hierarchical, like a Russian doll. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a Russian doll, but there's like a small doll inside of a bigger doll, which is inside of a bigger doll. So each layer is built upon the previous layer and captures the link between empathic behaviors and biological capabilities. At the lowest level, there's effective communication competence, which entails the ability to recognize emotions and express emotions effectively. One existing interactive agent model is the embodied conversation agent. These are multimodal models that engage in real-time conversation and take in information from multiple sensory channels. They seek to emulate human-to-human conversations, and in research, they typically refer to sympathetic and compassionate behaviors as empathy. However, this is, again, only one component of empathy, and other ECAs utilize lower-level empathic functionings, such as mirroring, to achieve empathy in conversations. Some other models that have been proposed for higher functioning include the Emma, CARE, Greta, Trains, 92 frameworks. The Emma model uses continuous representation of empathy and modulation mechanisms to adjust the expressed empathy. This is known as effective matching. The CARE model learns empathy by observing human interactions in a treasure hunt game and tracking intentions, age, gender, and other components, and paralleling reactive empathy and varying it with context and targets. The Greta model utilizes both high and low-level mechanisms, displaying empathic mimicry, and takes in other contextual factors to form more long-term decisions, which are slightly higher-level mechanisms compared to the ECA models and the other two that I mentioned. The Trains 92 system utilizes a more complex predictive model to infer users' intentions and adapt the dialogue of the conversation accordingly, which can be paralleled to the human theory of mind functioning, which again is important to cognitive empathy. An approach based on personality has been proposed as well, with successful social interactions being marked by correct nonverbal cue reasoning and personality of the AI agent being adjusted to capture the personality of the target influences the expression of the AI. AI models that allow for general knowledge about the goal and beliefs of the user can allow for higher empathic reasoning and perspective taking, ensuring that the agent uses some of this knowledge to adjust their conversational expressions. Deep learning models have learned to utilize context as well as user input, with the deep neural network successfully taking in input from a user and updating their conversational output in response to perceived internal states of the user. A completely separate study focused on cognitive development robotics, which they termed affective development robotics in this paper, or ADR. ADR attempts to understand human affective developmental processes with the core concept that social interaction enables information structuring through interacting with the environments. Two approaches have been utilized in improving understanding of human developmental processes. It includes the computational model for affective development, having a verification with virtual/real agent elements, and a different approach in which new means or data include providing a robot as a reliable reproduction tool in physiological experiments. Two components of human affective development have become the focus of ADR, artificial development, specifically emotional contingent and affective/cognitive empathy. From previous experiments, it was shown that the AI models achieve early development of self-other cognitive systems, enabling the robot to imitate others' actions. It is suggested that these results, paired with the vision modality to the artificial neural network, could provide a seamless connection between the stages of development of self and other contingent. Additionally, research has shown that after learning, robots respond to the caregiver's internal states through observing human facial expressions and expressions of its own internal state, only if synchronization evokes a response to the caregiver's internal state. Furthermore, a robot called Affetto has proven to be effective in human-like impressions and behaviors through mimicking 1 to 2-year-old children, both physically and technologically. In other studies, different agents' mind holderness and mind readerness was measured in the context of social interactions. The human, android, and humanoid all demonstrated positive correlations between mind holderness and mind readerness, both aspects which may correspond to emotional and cognitive aspects of empathy. So all of these studies put together sort of showed that the development of empathy is still being studied and still trying to be modeled in its completeness. However, again, empathy is very multifaceted and requires a lot of, social interaction in order for it to develop social interaction and secure attachment in order for it to develop completely and healthily, as was shown through the development part of this podcast, as well as the introduction. So it'll be interesting to see if, artificial intelligence engineers are able to effectively mimic human empathy. We saw with ChatGPT that it was effective, but with higher, more complicated artificial intelligence agents. Is it possible? And, would it be a good thing? I don't know. We'll talk about it with our guests. So I'm here with our next guest.
Hi, my name is Yuqing Zhu. I'm a visiting assistant professor of neuroscience. Hi.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to just go straight into the questions. So how important do you think it is that AI or artificial intelligence entities, because there's lots of different kinds, have the ability to empathize?
This is a good question. I will preface this by saying, so I'm a neuroscientist. I do not study the neuroscience of empathy. I'm a computational neuroscientist, so I do a little bit of work with AI for the goal of studying. Okay, so that's my background. The question of empathy and AI, I think there's a few different ways to interpret this question. The first way is it important for AI to behave in a way that humans perceive as having empathy? And I think that depending on the application, that could be really important as AI takes on more roles in our lives and we need to interact with AI more and more. I think it could be really important, for example, AI in healthcare settings and other sorts of caretaking educational settings. I think it would be just a better overall experience for everyone if the humans in the scenario perceive the AI agents as being empathetic. I think also there is the question of true empathy, however one can measure that, I don't know yet. But the question being, just to restate, is it important that AI has true empathy? And I'm not sure how to begin to answer this question. I think yes, the answer is still yes, it's important for AI to have empathy, especially as AI becomes more and more more and more intelligent, possibly being given greater responsibilities, given greater trust from humans in whatever role this AI is taking on. I think in those circumstances, if there reaches a point where an AI agent needs to make some judgment call, that it would be able to do so with empathy. I think that would be really important, especially in those scenarios that I mentioned previously of an AI in kind of a caretaking role. Yeah, as for how we could go about actually implementing these things, that is a big undertaking. I think the other related question is it important I think what is really, really important is for the people who are AI researchers or people who are funding AI research, these people, essentially people who make AI happen. I think it's important that these people are empathetic. So I think, again, AI is being deployed in so many different applications now and will only be more prevalent in the future. And so I'm thinking of a few different categories of people that make AI happen. I think there are a few categories of people that make AI happen. The biggest category right now I'm thinking is just corporations. So, corporations being a whole structure, a whole group of people, but I'm going to move ahead and think of corporations as kind of singular entity, corporation. because there's like a kind of bottom line for a corporation, which is to make profit. And I think when that is the bottom line, there's not enough room for empathy to enter the picture. And even if empathy does enter the picture, it's still in service of that bottom line. And I think when you have that occurring, then bad actors can act badly. I think, so for example, I don't have a concrete example, still hypotheticals, but if an AI is built with the goal of having it behave empathetically, and this AI is being sold by some corporation that wants to make a profit, then it could definitely be used to, building AI to be empathetic can also be kind of a manipulative tactic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to keep these things in mind. The more empathetic we perceive another being, whether that's AI or not AI, to be, I feel the more susceptible we are to suggestions from that agent. We're more susceptible to do things that agent might benefit from us doing. And so I think in that scenario, we might be really vulnerable to whatever goal a corporation would have, and the goal being to make profit off of us. So, yeah. I feel like I am digressing. But essentially drawing it back to the question, do I think it is important? Do I think empathy in AI is important? Absolutely, yes. I think it's important for AI to demonstrate empathy according to human measures of perceiving empathy. I think it's important for AI as potential future decision makers to make decisions with empathy. And I think it's important for the people who make AI happen to be more empathetic to their target audience, be more empathetic to what would be best for others as opposed to what would just be best for a corporation. Yes, that sums it up.
Okay, just to go off of what you were talking about, in reading the literature, I was a little bit confused on the different models that they were talking about and the different things that they were proposing in terms of how one would be able to accurately have artificial intelligence agents accurately mimic empathy, and or because there were a lot of them were making a clear distinction between what you said, displaying empathy but not actually accurately mimicking empathy, and all the different things that go into empathizing. I was wondering if you could because we learned a lot of things in your coding class, and a lot of different ways to code models essentially. I was wondering if you had any sort of ideas on what it would look like for maybe just a simple language or something like ChatGPT, because I know that a lot of those things, they do implement a degree of empathy in those responses and in those what would that process look like, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I don't study empathy or model it at all. I guess I can conjecture. So, and I don't know about ChatGPT in particular, the work that's been done on empathy with it or using it, but I guess one way there's a whole class of neural network models now. They're called GANs for short, GAN, for generative adversarial network. Mm-hmm. And the key word here, for the sake of what I'm about to describe, the key word here is generative. So that means this model can create things. So for what we're talking about, this model can maybe the model would be it would need to be a little bit more complex than a standard GAN for the listeners who know about GANs. the key thing is it's able to generate things, and it's able to generate things that maybe elicit, oh, this model is empathetic. So it maybe is able to create text in conversation. It's maybe able to create sequences of images, video, music, etc. I don't know exactly how to measure empathy beyond just humans coming in and rating something as empathetic or not. So if a human were to have a conversation or to read like a generated piece of text from this network, and the human were to rate the, like, oh, is this network displaying empathy in this like hypothetical text conversation scenario, etc., then we can kind of train this network in order to score well with these human scores of empathy. So that's like and it doesn't have to be like this particular setup, but one of the thing, like, it's not just empathy. I think cognitive properties are just hard to pin down. Like, what does it mean for something to be memorable? What does it mean for something to be beautiful? I think these things are just like hard properties to really quantify. And one thing that I've seen be done, this sort of framework using a generative network, where the generative network is maybe hooked up to a bunch of other components, etc., but this generative network can create things, and then humans can rate what it creates on like a beauty score or like empathy score, etc., and then that becomes feedback to the network in order for it to reevaluate and regenerate things, help it to score better. So it's kind of this like feedback loop, and in that way we can build models that are more empathetic. This is, of course, not about like true empathy in decision making and so on. It's just about appearing empathetic to human scorers of the model. Yeah, that's what I have.
And then in terms of like what you talked about with like the people that are training the models, making sure that they're prioritizing empathy and not just like appealing to like corporations and like profit. I feel like I've heard from peers, like a friend of mine that's also a senior and was talking about like his class where they were, I don't really know, but he was saying that they were talking about something that would have to recognize like whether an object is like a human or like is like, so that I don't know what it was. It was something about like, I think a car stopping and like recognizing whether the thing in the road is like a human or like not. And like the responses from his peers were not as like empathetic or generally concerned for like others' well-being as he like thought that they would be. So I was wondering, like, do you think that in your experience, like having gotten your PhD
I guess I will clarify, I got my PhD in computational neuroscience.
Okay.
That's the official name of the program.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, in having like gone through all of that, do you feel like that's like empathy and like prioritizing like the human experience with these like artificial intelligence like agents and like all of that, do you think that's prioritized in your courses, or has it been prioritized, or if not, like should it be more so?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think everybody could benefit from everybody being more empathetic. So I think that, it was never explicitly taught in these courses. I think I was very lucky to have had good experiences with fairly empathetic peers and mentors throughout grad school, and so it was taught to me through actions, but not like through coursework really. I think empathy is something that requires some education in, and I would like to see that happen from just like fairly early on in somebody's life. I think right now, like learning empathy kind of comes through just like individual social connections that a person has, rather than like through like a broader like educational institutional framework of like we should promote these values, etc. I don't know whether like institutionalizing empathy training is like gonna go as well as we think it might go, but I do think it's something that is important to be taught, and I feel like it has not been taught, and I think it's sad that the story that you're referring to has folks responding not as empathetically as one would hope. So I think like just education, and also just like not like education in the sense of directives of you must be more empathetic. Like I don't think that would be the way to go about it. But just like just education about differences, about tolerance, about how to have conversations in good faith. I think that's really important to see more of.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to text the other person to make sure that I think they're here, but this is the last question. Okay, do you think that it is possible for artificial intelligence agents to accurately like mimic human emotions, and then like especially the ones as complex as empathy? I know we've already sort of talked about what it would look like for just like, you know, what was it called? The GAN things, yeah. But like in terms of like a more holistic form of empathy, like actually feeling, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you think that's possible even like in the near future, in the distant future, or?
I think it is possible. I don't have a good estimate on timeline. But I think it is possible. I mean, it's certainly possible to have AI behave in a way that we would rate as empathetic. That's super possible. That's happening. I think for AI to behave like autonomously, making decisions about their actions, using empathy, being guided by empathy, I think that's also very possible. I think as for whether they would feel empathy, like whether they're like they can be perceived as behaving empathetically, they can make decisions and act empathetically, but whether while they're acting empathetically they truly experience feelings of empathy akin to the ones we feel, I'm not so sure about. But I also will take the extreme stance that I think it is possible on long enough like timelines with people who want to make this happen enough. Yeah, I think I'm quite a technological optimist in that sense, that I think pretty much it is possible to engineer anything. I'm a technological pessimist in the sense that I think anything that we engineer can be used for greater detriment. But yes, so I think my overall answer to this question is yes. For it, because it's a much bigger philosophical question too, like which I don't feel qualified to speak to, but I like thinking about anyway, which is like, can machines ever feel? Like, do they have internal experiences, not just of empathy, but of like anything else that we have internal experiences of, whether that's as complex as like empathy, or whether it's as simple as I feel cold, or like all of these things that we experience. Can it be possible for a machine to experience it? I want to say yes, again, being an optimist. Yeah, I want to say yes. I don't have any idea as to how to get that done right now, but I really see no reason for why it is impossible, and so therefore I have to say that, again, if people want to make this happen enough, if they have enough time and resources, that can happen.
Okay, one follow-up question.
Yeah.
Just based on that, a lot of the literature like sort of avoided the like ethical questions. So I'm just gonna broadly ask, like, how ethical do you think it is to like train an agent to, again, fully be able to like feel these things?
Yeah.
And like experience these things?
I think it would not be ethical to do that without having things in place that kind of protect the personhood of this like artificial agent. Because it's like once we get to a point where they are experiencing feelings, then that they can also experience negative feelings. And given that we've seen from prior anecdote that people are not that empathetic even to other people, they're going to be much less empathetic to a machine, right? So I think before we build things that can feel, we need to be responsible for them too. We need to be able to protect them. Of course, there's also the flip side of like once they get to that point, like we need to protect ourselves. This again like depends on like a lot of other perspectives. But I do think just like going forward without any other considerations and just trying to build a thing that has empathy, I think that's like not ethical on its own to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you have any questions for me or any like final comments?
No, this has been lovely. I guess one thing I will say is I think, yeah, like we just covered, is it ethical to build like an agent that actually feels empathy? I said no. I think a related question that we've been talking about already is like, is it ethical to build agents that demonstrate empathy? I think also without anything else in place to protect, in this case, us, consumers, interactors with the agent, I think it's also not ethical to do for reasons that I stated previously, which is that it would be very easy to use such an agent to manipulate people. So that's an ethical consideration that I hold for basically all of AI.
Thank you so much, Professor Yushe.
Yay!
Hello, I'm Tesla, a math and computer science double major at Pomona College.
I'm gonna get straight into the questions. So the first question is, how important do you think it is that artificial intelligence agents have empathy?
Right. I guess it depends on the role that they play. Like, if I had an artificial intelligence agent on the battlefield, I probably wouldn't want it to be that empathetic. But if I have, a vacuum, a household, cleaning robot, I'd probably like it to be empathetic to the fact that maybe bumping into my toddler here to pick up that scrap of trash isn't as kind as just waiting for my toddler to move out of the way and then picking it up.
Okay, and I know I didn't provide you with any of like the literature in the background. However, they talk about like a good variety of different ways to like not train models, but different models, one that already exists that show like degrees of empathy. However, a lot of them don't show full empathy because empathy has so many different aspects that go into it. So I was just wondering, like, if you had, because there's already like ChatGPT shows like degrees of empathy and things like that. If you could, like, based on your background in computer science and math, if you could theorize a way in which to train a model to, like, I guess, display even just like partial empathy, because the literature is confusing to me, you know? So like, if you could explain it again from your experience, and then on an even further spectrum, like complete empathy and like all of its different aspects.
And I think these are really interesting questions you're having. One question first I have before I answer your question is, these models you're referring to, are you mainly talking about large language models, or which type?
So they talked about large language models like ChatGPT. Like, one of the studies talked about how people saw that, like, in just like a subjective report, that ChatGPT, just like the responses were more empathetic than like physician responses. So like, one of the papers talked about large language models like ChatGPT. And then another study talked about a bunch of different models. They talked about, they called them embodied conversational agents. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but they said that they're
You put it in a robot. robot you can talk to.
Yep, exactly. Okay. And then other ones they talked about was like something called Emma.
Oh yeah, similar private body robot, but I think I'm familiar with the types of models or artificial intelligence you're talking about.
Yeah. And then they talked about Care. There's another model, Greta, and then Trains 92. Those all
Some
like
of
the same
those
category.
last ones I'm not as familiar with.
Okay.
But the first couple I do a bit about, yeah. And I guess an umbrella, general category that you're interested in.
Yeah, that's basically all the studies that I talked about in the introduction. But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think this ties back to a class I took spring of my junior semester, Philosophy of Mind. It was at CMC taught by Professor Amy Tyne. I took it because I was actually interested in very similar conundrums, which is that, to answer your question also is to kind of answer, did life start at the mind or at the body, and what kind of implications does that have for us? So then, like I would ask to you, is empathy something we feel, in our minds, or, is it something like a theoretical like concept, or do you believe that it's a tangible thing? It's the dopamine coursing through our body.
I believe it's a tangible thing, but that sort of goes into like whether or not you believe, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but whether you believe like the mind is a separate entity from like the body.
Yes.
And me personally, from all in I might have been like indoctrined from like Professor Lewis and like Professor Weeks sort of telling us that like that's not true. But I'm more so leaning towards that from taking the neuroscience courses that I've taken. Even like a course that I'm taking now as a senior called like free will and like determinism. I think that's what it's called, but it's all about all of that. And whether or not we have free will, or like all of it is just like our environment and how our environment interacts with like the biological things that occur within our mind. Or our brain and our mind, you know what I mean? So yeah.
So you believe that it's like it's a tangible thing, like the chemical?
I do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. No, that's great. And I actually have some people I know that would agree with you. And okay, so now like from that, to get AI to get to feel empathy is to get them to feel that sensation or get across that sensation. But then also, I think at the same time, I have to clarify what AI is like right now. You mentioned ChatGPT, large language models, and I think something that would be helpful or insightful for your research that I can kind of translate, having read some of those research papers, is it actually all goes back before ChatGPT. So ChatGPT kind of got popular in 2022, or like last year or so, I would say 2023, 2022. But it starts off in this paper, Word2Vec by researchers at Google in 2013. And there, kind of some of the backdrop is that you have to understand that it's Google. They're coming out with a suite of products, one of which is Google Docs. Also simultaneously, they're in charge of, filtering the text corpus that is the internet, accordingly ranking pages on the internet, so that whenever people pass in a query, they get search results that are most relevant to their query. And so they've had to develop, they can't manually do this. They can't have a human go in and read every web page on the internet and rank them, according to just every possible query that any human can think of. So they have to come up with ways of doing this in an automated fashion. So like there's I'll talk about just this one. There's a lot you could talk about with some of their technological innovations, but I'll just talk about this one as it relates to ChatGPT and large language models. But you can come at it from another perspective of the worldwide internet and how they came to rank it, or categorize it as a source of information so that people can efficiently search for things. They basically made like a library for the internet. You know what I'm saying? There was no library before, and now everyone in the world is going up to their counter, and any question they have, they're asking them. But so anyways, I'm rambling, sorry. But like, so Word2Vec, this 2013 paper, they have these, text corpuses, and they come up with this method. This method kind of takes like a sliding window. They make it however long, right? And they're trying to replicate humans reading, right? What it's like for a human to read a text corpus. So they take a window, say of like 3 words, right? And a Google Doc, like the format of a Google Doc, it comes in multiple lines, right? So they take this window, and it's like the height is like 1 line long, right? And the width is maybe 3 words. And they take the sliding window and they slide it across the entire Google Doc, right? And they keep track of words that are next to one another. So in the sentence, I am a big cat, if our sliding window is 3 words long, we would get combinations I am a big, and a big cat. Those would be the 3-word combinations we would get as the sliding window is sliding across. And we would do that for the entire Google Doc. And then they keep track of words that they have a metric, a way of keeping counts, incrementing counts. You come to realize that a big part of math is just keeping counts of things and being logical about what you're observing. But so they keep account of all of the words that they see together. And then they pass this into a neural network. And then from that neural network, they get outputs of, they get a model representation of what was in that text corpus. What does that mean? So, well, a better way of putting it is, there's a reason behind why we string words together in a certain fashion to communicate ideas. Like, we identify it as, subject, predicate, verb, whatever. We have terms for this, understanding the structure in our language, right? Simultaneously, the structure exists for other languages, and it's different. The structure is different across different languages. What this means is that there's some underlying reason, we don't know why, but there's some reason behind the way or how humans put together words to communicate ideas, thoughts. And all this model, the Word2Vec model, was good at was identifying, given some words, what word is most likely to come next. So it basically is a really good guess/checker from what it's seen before. So if you were playing like, fill in the blanks, humans are pretty good at fill in the blank type problems, right? Like, I imagine you've probably like done those word puzzles like in middle school or high school, like on days off or on like field trips/fun days, or towards the end of the school year when they're having to do busy work assignments or just fun assignments. It's like, fill in the word that goes here. Or if you're trying to learn a new language, the very like easy basic words of fill in red in like a different language, right? It's like trying to get a machine to be good at that, and it's training it off of previous evidence that it's seen. And so now that was the state of the art in 2013. And actually, like, I've done some research that intersects with that, but for like graphs and social networks, social media networks. But so anyways, like large language models comes as a result of another landmark paper from Google. There was another landmark paper by Google in 2017 called Attention is All You Need. And they introduce a new type of neural network architecture called the transformer model. And now what the transformer model introduces is, these guys, I'm trying to tell you, or I've been keeping track of this since I took algorithms my sophomore year. But the theory of computer science or machine learning, AI, I think is a programmatic re-implementation of the brain. If you saw with how I was redescribing that Google paper, they're trying to recapture how we read and, make sense of what will come next. And so now in this 2017 paper, they provided a new neural network architecture. I don't know much about it, the technical aspects about it, right? Here I'll say like it's a bit of the hype. But what I think is the most important new feature of this, like coming out of this model is that it has an attention aspect or a sense of memory. So for the words that it's previously seen, it now has some way to like make other words more important than other words. For example, if I'm telling you a really long-winded story with a bunch of names of my friends, it now has some way of weighing the value of my names, the names of my friends, which are much more important to the story than say, oh, and on that Tuesday, like I ate a French fry. Like you probably don't want to remember that, or that doesn't have as much to tell you to the meaning of my story as perhaps some other elements. Like say if it was about a burglary, you would probably be more interested in the names of who was involved. Did we get caught? Did we get away? Rather than, oh, I ate a French fry. And so through this attention aspect, it's able to pay attention to more of the previous things that it's seen in contrast to other things. So they're recreating the human brain. So eventually right now they're putting the internet in front of it, right? And they're talking about it in this manner. If you find some of the people who had Google AI, DeepMind AI, Facebook AI, and just listen to them talk to software engineers at conferences. They talk about a baby and how many images a baby sees in the lifespan. It's the first 4 years of its life. As a toddler, in first grade, by the time it reaches second grade, all of that. And they're trying to recreate this through the lens of a computer. They're trying to make a computer the child. They're trying to recreate humans. And I think there's one person also, Eric Schwitzgaber, he came and gave a CS colloquium. Yes, he is forward thinking for looking ahead at why are companies so fascinated with recreating the human brain in an industrial context. That's because the first person to do so is the first person to recreate slavery in the digital form, but my worry is that, for him, and this is where it's like my personal opinion. I was talking about this with John West too, and John was actually the one who proposed this, but he was concerned that Schwitzgaber was concerned for the consciousness of AI first most than the consciousness of currently living people. It's like, why are we already even getting to talking about AI that'll be conscious, like fretting about that, which could very well be a real possibility with how fast technology is going, right? Than currently living people. And I think something else that also needs to be talked about in the conversation of AI is, and perhaps even in the empathy of AI, is how has privilege already pervaded through AI, and how will it make it that much harder to be empathetic? Like think about who's leading the conversations on AI, and have those generally been the people who have been empathetic in the past?
Wow. There's so many things to ask
I'm trying
about
to
now.
get really good thesis content.
So generally you spoke about large language models and how they function and all of that, and the general consensus is that they're attempting to build structures that accurately mimic the human brain, correct? Right? So there's so many different things that I could ask you.
Sure.
However, before I get into the ethical questions, let me address the last question that you asked me. I actually talked about this a little bit with Professor Yushing, and she just really emphasized that it's very important that the people that are, if it were to be something that were to come about, that artificial intelligence agents are able to accurately even just mimic human empathy, that the correct things have to be in place for those things to be ethical, for it to be ethical to even train an artificial intelligence agent to do those things. And I found that really interesting because it's we're already doing that without those things in place.
Oh, definitely.
And then she also just really emphasized that the people that are like you talked about, that are training these agents and that are part of these corporations, that they're doing it for the sake of that they themselves have empathy, that they are doing it for the sake of bettering the corporation that they're working for, and it's mostly for profit, capitalism, etc. So it's really interesting that you also have that same train of thought, and then the people that are so forward thinking, they're not really considering the past and just the baseline, So
and
that's
think
really
about
interesting.
what kind of ethical or legal fences Google or OpenAI had to jump through to release ChatGPT. None, probably. They just put it on the internet. And it's who do they have to respond to? You know, exactly. And that kind of makes sense why there was those a couple. I don't really keep track with news, politics, etc. But it kind of makes sense why Sam Altman had to appear at some of those congresses. I saw YouTube clips of him doing that. But it was just kind of like so foreign, and only I think there's not enough communication of between people who are knowledgeable about technology, people who are knowledgeable about politics, and critical thinking system.
That is so true. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to more of the theoretical things, and then we'll talk about ethical things too. But do you think that it's possible for AI to accurately be able to, like, you talked about the human brain as a whole, but I'm gonna draw it back to just empathy and like human emotions. Do you think it's possible for artificial intelligence agents to completely, holistically, like, feel empathy or feel even at a basic level like sadness, happiness, etc.?
Yeah, well, if you go back to, I think I kind of answered this in my first answer, which if you go back, you'll hear I basically said, what's your definition of empathy? And then if you can make the computer or the AI feel that, then yeah, and like your definition, then yes. If not, then no.
Okay.
That would be like, my response to it.
Yeah.
As for like, maybe like my personal, like, dream, like, I think I would say I fantasize about this, but like not necessarily in the way that AI will have empathy, but that in a way that we will have empathy for AI. So I'm interested in creating a hosting company. A hosting company is essentially another way of saying I want to be in charge of keeping computers on for companies and posting their websites on it and like whatever online stuff they need to do, because it turns out it's cheaper for one person to manage all of that than for everyone to manage their own computer. And the name of the first computer, I'm naming it after my mother, because I have this, like, I think it's called a parasocial relationship, or I have this idea of a parasocial relationship of building a company centered around employees working on building or developing a computer that is my mother, or named after my mother. And it's kind of like the Chick-fil-A.
So interesting.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the Chick-fil-A version of my like computer company, where at Chick-fil-A they have to say my pleasure, and it ties back to Chick-fil-A being a family-owned company, and like In-N-Out is a family-owned company, and McDonald's I think might be majority family-owned, but then Amazon is predominantly owned by the really rich people. And so kind of getting at least in my socialization process, I've seen organizations or things built by exclusive groups, and so I would find it really interesting in this exclusive group being my company, where things are done kind of how I envision them to be, where it's like a group of people working on, kind of like how I imagine Google has internal computers and Amazon has internal computers that they have their employees working on. But in there, it's kind of like, if you see their naming format, they say AWS.NA referring to North America or -1 referring to like which is it in the upper region or bottom region, and then which zone, like -6 to refer to which zone it's in. But basically this really like robotic, like almost warehouse type like name, very general, allows like, just anyone to connect to their computers and do business to it, identify which region it is in and all that stuff. But here I'm gonna have this idea of making a hosting company or enterprise company where the computers, the servers worldwide are, named after people, the first one being my mother, and because I'm serving as the first president, but for a future presidents, I would hope they would be allowed to choose the names of historical people or, other things, so that we can develop emotional relationships with these computers we're working on in this company that's all hedged on computers. But that's what I mean, like, that's that vision of empathy I have, is us developing empathy for AI, not AI being able to develop empathy. But then to answer your question most directly, it's like, what is your philosophical definition of empathy? And then do you philosophically believe a computer can achieve that?
Okay, so just to backtrack a little bit, you asked me like whether or not I believe empathy is just biological. And the answer to the secondary question of whether AI could accurately mimic empathy in that case would be yes. In the case of empathy not just being biological, if those are the two options, but those are the two options that were like initially presented, so I'm going to stick with those for now.
Okay.
Do you think it's possible, like, if empathy is not just biological, it's more of like a, philosophical, like the mind is again separate from the body, like,
Yeah.
do you think that would be possible?
Yeah, if it's like a treatment thing, if it's like a rubric thing, if it's like a can be assessed thing, like I need to just talk to a human about their day, and they had a rough day, and I talk to them and they feel better, and that's like, I passed the test of like, I demonstrated empathy. I think a computer can pass that eventually. Yes, I don't know if we necessarily.
Even now they are.
Yes, yeah, where like people are reading passages from a
exactly.
human and like ChatGPT and trying to check them.
Yeah, and then I have a question about. So you talked about you envision us having empathy for AI and like agents, rather than artificial intelligence agents having empathy for us. I'm gonna ask you what you think the ethical implications are for both situations, like good and bad.
Like of those two ultimatums.
Yeah, because for example, like I feel like the two things that I think about essentially, like especially it's just like movies. I think of like Ex Machina, in which the machine pretty accurately is able to like display human emotions, and like I don't know how much the machine displays empathy from the last time I saw the movie. However, it's very clear that like the main character in Ex Machina, or one of the main characters in the machine, I can't remember her name, is feeling human emotions and obviously wants to have autonomy and like live its own life. And then the other movie I think about is, I think it's Her. You know what I'm talking about? But the movie where the main character develops like feelings for, I don't know if it was like a computer agent. Maybe I should Google it really quick. But like essentially he develops romantic feelings for, this is 2013 was literally over 10 years ago. Isn't that crazy? 2013.
Oh yeah, I
like
remember being in middle school writing my header.
Like,
getting the date.
Now we're
wrong.
graduating.
It was 2012 before I like, it's 2013.
Now we're literally graduating. Okay. It just says that he meets like a program named Samantha, and like eventually it's after he gets a divorce from his original wife, and he eventually like develops a relationship with this program and falls in love with the program. I feel like love requires empathy, so what are the like what are the ethical implications? I feel like those two movies talk about it a little bit, but more so in like obviously visual way, and all those things are up to interpretation. What are your thoughts?
I would say those movies are a little bit like science
fiction,
fantasy, slash like romance slash drama. I would say like kind of like my interpretation of those questions, as you put it, where AI being able to have empathy for us, and then also us having empathy for AI. I think where I envision us having empathy, I'll talk about us having empathy for AI first. I think that comes into play and kind of plays, you can make an analogy to like the movie trope of like, if you don't say please after every ChatGPT response, it'll eventually become so smart and like kill you, right? I would say if you don't use please like in your ChatGPT responses, comes back to bite you. You're not thinking about the amount of resources that went into training the model in terms of computational costs, like the electricity it used, the heat it generated, because we don't have access to the data of how much heat Amazon, Microsoft's, Google's data centers generate and how much carbon it generates. I don't think, or at least I haven't gone looking for it myself yet. That's where I think, like, us, and then also along those lines of consciousness that we talked about earlier, us having empathy for AI will look like, and then I think also have like a beneficial return for us. But then also for AI being able to develop empathy, I think that'll only have benefits for humans. I think that's only good for humans, because I think, as I mentioned right now, AI fills this role that is subhuman. And so the more things it can do for me, the better. Yeah. And so where it becomes concerning is that eventually this tool that does so many good things for me, why would I ever want to give it the right of consciousness? And we're back into the argument for slavery.
That's very true. Yeah, Professor Yushing sort of touched on that, like, at the same time that we're pushing these things towards such groundbreaking, like, abilities, there's also, like, the idea of, like, those things can be very easily, like, manipulated. So, yeah, I'm glad, again, that you touched on it as well. And those are all the questions that I have. So, do you have any final questions for me or final comments you would like to add?
What do you think about AI being able to have empathy?
Personally, when I was reading the literature, I was very, like, confused why they didn't touch on the ethics as much. They were more so very, like, pro development of empathy. Maybe that's because that's like the literature I was seeking out, like how it would, like, what it would look like and, like, things like that. But I think in terms of what I think about it, I think it's very similar to what both you and Professor Yushing talked about. I'm not sure how comfortable I am, like, currently, because there's just so many things going on in the world. Adding that as an extra layer of, like, because when I think empathy, I think holistic empathy, not just mimicking empathy. We're already there. Like, I feel like we're already there. We're already past that. Whether or not, like, the right things were in place, like the ChatGPT example that I talked about earlier. But, like, holistically, like, being able to feel empathy, artificial intelligence agencies, I think, like you talked about, those things can be very easily manipulated for corporate greed, or just greed in general, or just bad things in general. And I don't think that's where we need to be. I think that the beginning step that we need to, like, all the way go back to is, like, us having basic empathy for each other before we get into developing empathy for entities that aren't, like, that we don't completely understand. So yeah, there's just a lot of different things going on in the world that need to be addressed first before we can even think about that sort of very, like, futuristic, almost science fiction aspect. But yeah,
I'm excited to read your thesis.
Thank you. It's gonna be a podcast, so you don't have to read it, but you could read the literature if you want. It's very long, but I mean, you can just read the empathy and AI part.
I think I'll just listen.
Okay, all right, great. So just to conclude, I want to say thank you to my two guests for this episode, but also thank you to all of the guests throughout the entire, I guess, season. This is the only season I'm like so exhausted, and I, like, hate editing podcasts. I found out maybe if I can, like, hire a younger freshman or something. I'm graduating, but if I could hire a freshman to edit next time, like, I would do it in a heartbeat. But yeah, I want to say thank you to both my guests. I think that people that are interested in computer science are, like, so smart, and they, like, talk about things in a way that I just completely do not like understand sometimes. But I think a lot of interesting things were touched upon in this conversation that weren't touched upon with the literature, especially with the ethical aspects of just, like, how things would be manipulated with a group of people that don't really understand empathy themselves as much as they should and don't have as much empathy for just each other. How would that extend to, you know, one, programming empathy in artificial intelligence agents, and then on top of that, having empathy for those agents, and then, like, just a number of layers and layers and layers of things that need to be addressed before we look into, like, trying to program artificial intelligence agents to have such realistic emotions. And yeah, I just want to say again, I'm very grateful for all the perspectives I was offered throughout this entire thesis project. I just want to thank all of my guests, and I want to thank the two guests from this episode specifically. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast, this series. I hope it helped you reflect upon a lot of things. I hope you continue to live throughout life with more empathy and increasing empathy. I hope the same for myself. And yeah, thank you guys so much.